And let's now proceed to the second presentation that is from Associate Professor Dr. Ziyaad Mahomed with the title Islamic Fintech Outlook 2022, the Director, Lead Research Sharia, Center of Excellence Islamic Social Finance, INSIAF University. فيتفضل مأجورا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا برحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. To the organizers, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts to the participants. I've been warned 15 minutes and I'm going to try to stick to that as far as possible, and that's why I'm going to put a timer right in front of me. Okay. Okay. Global Islamic Fintech Outlook for 2022. We're going to talk quickly about the current landscape, and then we're going to move into some opportunities that exist, and finally some risks that may just obstruct that types of opportunities, and finally a global outlook snapshot. So I'm going to keep it simple and straightforward. There's a lot of information that we cannot share within 15 minutes. The issues around digital assets and crypto, NFTs and metaverse, that's a topic on its own. So I'm just going to rather skim the surface of the various Islamic fintech topics. But I think this quote is quite important. We're witnessing the creative destruction of financial services, rearranging itself around the consumer. Consumer-based banking, consumer-based financial services, that's what we're looking at going forward. And BaaS is something that we need to consider. I've not covered it in the slides. Banking that's focused on banking as a service rather than banking as an institution. So there's a change that's taking place, and whoever can adapt, well, they will be the first movers, they will be the winners. Remember the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Well, that's exactly what's happening right now in the fintech industry. So who does the most in the most exciting way and in the easiest understandable way, they will be successful. Globally, Indonesia has been at the lead. As you can see, 61 Islamic fintechs. These numbers are not absolute. This is coming out of a report. Naturally, it's evolving as time goes by, but it's 20% of Islamic fintech companies internationally. You'll find them in Indonesia. Followed by the United Kingdom, and that's a very interesting statistic, and you're going to see a little bit later why that's interesting. We're going to talk about the UK for a minute or two. But the UAE, understandably, has been doing well. Why do I say understandably? Because they've spent a lot in developing fintech hives. They've spent a lot in bringing over expertise from Silicon Valley, and they've really been incubating fintech startups to move into the Middle Eastern sector and offer some really value-added services. Saudi Arabia is right at the top in terms of market size, particularly from market value in billions. You can see $26 billion worth of Islamic fintech taking place in Saudi Arabia, followed by Iran and Malaysia. Now, the total market size of $79 billion is really just a speck in the fintech ocean. From an Islamic fintech perspective, we're looking at less than 1%. Less than 1% of the total fintech space. And that's tiny. And this is really just a microcosm of how Islamic finance has been developing over the last 60 years. It still represents a tiny portion and quite disproportionate to population. So you've got a quarter or at least 20% of the world's population being Muslim, but less than 1% of Islamic finance is being represented. You see a similar thing happening in Islamic fintech. And if you drill down into aspects like takaful or social finance, you will find that that gap widens quite substantially when it shouldn't. Indonesia is the fastest growing since 2016. And we've got to look at that landscape and why it's been doing so well. It has strong enabling frameworks in place. It has 4 major fintech associations with 1 dedicated association to Islamic fintechs that is, of course, reporting to OJK. That's AFSI. In terms of sector and category, if we were to focus on the type of fintech company, Islamic fintech company, then Islamic crowdfunding is at the lead. So more than 53 Islamic fintech companies are actually crowdfunders, and then you should match that with the sector. Financing. The financing sector is the leading sector. So crowdfunding, but offering financing. As you might well know, crowdfunding has 4 major categories, only one of which fits within the financing arena, and that seems to be the dominant approach to Islamic crowdfunding as we've been going along, and this is as at 2022. So the little heat map that you see there by category, the largest indicates, the largest block indicates the largest in terms of number of companies, crowdfunding, payment channels, challenger banks, and robo-advisory. Now, a word of caution here on robo-advisory. So what we're seeing in terms of Islamic robo-advisories is not really AI-enabled robo-advisory. No, it's a very simplistic, straightforward flow chart of questions and answers, and that directs you to a handful of portfolios, nowhere near what true robo-advisory powered by AI should be. So there's a lot that we still need to work on when it comes to Islamic robo-advisory. Robo-advisory tying in with wealth management as well. Digital assets I alluded to right at the beginning. I mean, that's a huge topic on its own, but there's a major gap. And you'll often see that scholars, practitioners are talking about crypto and how it will solve the world's problems in terms of financial inclusion, but it has not. It hasn't even made a scratch on the surface of financial inclusion. So there's a lot of work to be done if we are really attempting to sell that crypto as being a solution to the underbanked or unbanked and underserved. It's not happening right now. And what it's causing, in fact, is more of the early stage new company mindset, which is purely speculative. Real use cases are limited in the crypto and Islamic digital asset space, unfortunately. Social impact tokens, that's where the biggest gap lies. Because while conventionally and traditionally, you have strong presence of social impact tokens, tokens that really benefit the community through rewarding plastic collection or rewarding education. You don't see that from the Islamic fintech side, and really what you see is something that's labeled Islamic, and really what it does is more of a profit-driven initiative. Collaboration is increasing right now, and that's great. Incumbent banks, and that's the term given to our traditional banks, incumbent banks are partnering with fintechs, Islamic fintechs, to actually just leapfrog ahead of everyone. Because if you went the traditional route and spent a whole lot of capital trying to develop your own IT infrastructure as a traditional bank and focusing on fintech, then that wouldn't be the natural focus of your banking strategy. You'd need to partner. It would take too long if you went through the traditional approach. So an example of that is what we've just seen in the news, Bank Islam and Kestrel. There are many other examples, especially in the UK for Islamic fintech. The regulatory landscape right now, Malaysia's just released a consultation paper on technology risk. And of course, I think you're well aware that cybersecurity and data privacy is the forerunner in terms of risks facing fintechs as we go along. The gift index was launched in 2021. The second iteration just took place in 2022. It's dropped from 32 indicators to 19 indicators, 5 key categories, 64 countries. Malaysia is still leading as number one, and that's because of the ecosystem. But that lead is just by 1 point, as you can see, 81 to 80. So Saudi Arabia is hot on the heels of Malaysia. But there have been very interesting entrants like Brunei. They've moved up 11 points. And that's another country to watch. Countries that are most in need of Islamic fintech, countries like Nigeria and Bangladesh, well, they are still far down the line. And I think that a lot more development needs to take place in Islamic fintech development for those countries. UK is a non-OIC country. It's a Muslim minority, and it's an exception to the top 5 because it has a very well-established Islamic fintech market. So everything from SME financing to payment gateways to crypto and digital assets to Islamic banking from a fintech perspective, they've been doing pretty well. This is just a snapshot of the Malaysian Islamic fintechs. Pay Halal has been doing exceptionally well over the short term. Asst has been doing very, very well from the crowdfunding perspective, but it has been limited and slow. What are the opportunities? Well, global opportunities from a heat map perspective, these are the different categories: alternative financing, capital markets. You'd see that capital market solutions, liquidity solutions using fintech, that's the least developed right now on the Islamic fintech side, unfortunately. There are very few digital platforms that offer solutions for liquidity, treasury-based instruments, etc. And they're focused on in the major countries like in Malaysia, and you'll see in the Middle East. But beyond that, countries that are in real need of these solutions are still lagging when it comes to capital market solutions. Southeast Asia really doesn't have something strong in Islamic fintech and capital markets. On the other hand, you've got strong development in MENA GCC, but MENA should be read very specifically with the GCC as the focus and not the North African countries. When you look at the North African countries, that's MENA Other on the far right, you'll see that unfortunately very little development has taken place, and it's really lagging in terms of any form of Islamic fintech development. Social finance, social protection, from a takaful perspective, that's where the gaps lie. And takaful itself has been growing slowly internationally. Unfortunately, Takatech has been following that trend. But really what's disappointing is we talk a lot about social finance, zakat, apps, and waqf, but really from a digital platform perspective, there is very little out there that has made any difference to efficiency. Mostly what you're seeing is online banking that's doubling as zakat tech. It's not zakat tech. It's just online distribution and acceptance and payment channels. That's all they are. They don't do ratings of zakat. They don't do project-based KPIs or social impact scores. There's a lot of gaps that still exist from that perspective. We've not gone into Web 3.0 or Metaverse. The integration, that's fairly non-existent at the moment. There's just, little ideas and concepts of Islamic finance in Metaverse trading, but there's a lot that needs to happen there because this is a reality. Crypto is being used on the Metaverse. It's happening. Virtual meetings are taking place. Virtual purchases are taking place of land parcels. This is a reality, and it would need to be addressed post-haste. The market outlook generally, capital is needed. Startups must be more practical in their forecasting. There's a lot of predictions of how much they think they will achieve based on statistics of unbanked and underserved, not reality. Not reality. They are far from reality, and that's why they're not getting good venture capitalists coming in or private equity firms entering the market. So there's a lot to do there in terms of business strategy, business startups, etc. So very briefly, there's a lot of risks disrupting the disruptors. And primarily, regulatory non-compliance is going to be a major issue. There's been a lot of development, but there still needs to be a more enabling framework expanding especially into the regions that need it most. And here I'm talking about the SSA region or Sub-Saharan Africa, and then of course even in Southeast Asia. Sharia non-compliance, I'm going to touch on that just now to end off, but I'm just going to focus quickly on macro environment and cybersecurity. Islamic fintech, just like fintech, has been developing because of the needs that we're facing right now. And those needs, like the 2 years of semi-lockdown, those needs have been driving digital platforms, the gig economy, and fintech solutions. The thing is that that disruption of pandemic is just, as they say, you know, a curtain raiser. There's a lot more to come. Man-made natural disasters, we're talking about climate change, you know what's happening right now internationally. There needs to be a lot of work on actually synergizing and working together with ESG and sustainable objectives that will align and allow fintech to be the enabler to deliver good social impact scores, more accurate metrics, and of course bringing in the maqasid, as you will see just now. Decentralization, financial democratization, that's why we saw Bitcoin. It's a clear indicator of public distrust. But what's happening now is regulators are trying to bring that back in, understandably because of economic stability. But public distrust still needs to be addressed. You cannot ignore that simply by creating more and more regulation. Public confidence can only be increased if there is better transparency and the populist governments or the political environment changes for the people. That is not changing fast enough. Cybersecurity, I mean, that is a topic at any conference on fintech. Data privacy and data breaches are happening every day. We've just seen a major data breach on IP88 in Malaysia recently, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Across the US, you're seeing data breaches taking place every single day. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So in summary, there's a big gap. In addition to the risks, Islamic fintech ethics. Islamic fintech ethics is a significant gap, and this is where Sharia advisors need to step up. And providing fatwa and opinions without rigor in understanding the technology behind what's happening, those fatwas need to be taken with caution. And this means that Sharia scholars, whilst understanding that technology is agnostic, Sharia scholars need to understand the impact of fintech opportunities here. And that means that there's a brand new skill set that's required from Sharia advisors. And this is a big question we have to ask in maqasid. If you can simply tap your phone and acquire consumer financing through BNPL, does that fulfill the maqasid? Or does it just dig you deeper into a debt trap? Does it give you access to financing, which is great from one perspective, but on the other, does it really fulfill the protection of wealth going forward? The maqasidic dimensions have been largely non-existent, except for a little bit of VBI and some talk, a lot of talk about maqasid without clear metrics that are practical and operational. Financial inclusion has not been materially impacted. Let's be real, it's not been materially impacted. And again, I'm highlighting data privacy. All the data of Muslim consumers is now available. And let's not be naive. There are several countries and regions in the world that may use this data for nefarious reasons. And we need to be aware of that. That data of all Muslim behavior will be analyzed critically from using AI and machine learning. Final slide. Global Islamic Fintech Outlook, a snapshot, a summary of what we've talked about. I just want you to remember these 4 key numbers and 4 key aspects. Number 1, the current status. 365 Islamic fintechs as at 2022. That's July. $79 billion, just a drop in the ocean. Crowdfunding, financing dominates. Global outlook, 179 billion, but opportunities still exist in capital markets, digital assets, takaful, and social finance. 5 major risks we've highlighted, cybersecurity and regulation being at the top. Cyber threats remain the leading risk. Enabling regulation is required, and Sharia scholars adapting to new tech is required. Finally, the blind spot. And the blind spot is 1.7 billion people are unbanked. 50% of those are in Muslim countries, Muslim populations. Again, another disproportionate allocation. 20% of the world's population, 50% of the world's unbanked Muslim. And then finally, ethics. As we move along the technology evolution, are we addressing issues of excessive debt? Are we addressing AI and sentience? Are we addressing issues around machine learning and how we really analyze big data? That's a summary of the slides and the discussion for this morning. I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to stay within my time. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And now we'd like to invite Dr. Razi Pahlavi Abdul Aziz, the Managing Director of Amani Holdings, to present the memento. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Dr. Ziyaad. جزاكم الله خير الجزاء.